It is hard to overstate what a big deal the lean startup movement has been in Silicon Valley. Eric Ries, my guest today, is the initiator, I guess you would say, the leader of that movement. It's hard to give you a sense of when that book came out. I think it was 2011. What an impact it made and continues to make today. And if you've never been to one of the events, the lean startup conferences or any of the talks that Eric gives to thousands of people, it's incredible. It's like going to a rock concert. And, you know, in Silicon Valley, there's a million venture capitalists, maybe not all good ones, but a million. And there's a million founders, and they're probably all good, actually, because it's pretty damn hard to start a company. But in terms of pure thought leaders, there's not a lot. And I mean pure thought leaders, not here's my hot take on the market, or it's really hard to raise a venture fund these days, thought leaders. I mean people who really have an idea that animates a lot of people. There aren't a lot of those in Silicon Valley. Maybe Jim Collins before that with Good to Great. So it's really had a pretty big impact on Silicon Valley. And Eric's the guy who started it. The ideas were, as with anything, came from all kinds of places, from Japan, from Steve Blank's thought. But Eric articulated it, and he crystallized it and became a movement. One of the interesting things about the lean startup movement is, as ubiquitous as it is in Silicon Valley, it's also fairly often misunderstood in fairly interesting ways. I make the joke with Eric, which I'm sure he's heard 1,000 times. Well, if you know how to make a perfect company and you iterate, and why aren't you running a $1 trillion company? And he has, in this podcast, a very good answer for that, and explains a lot of what people get wrong about the lean startup movement. And in this episode, he talks about how the lean startup is going to function in an accelerated AI environment, what he thinks about AI, and, the answer to my joke. In any case, if you're the type of person who likes to listen to one good podcast instead of 10,000 podcasts, this is one good podcast. Eric Ries is fantastic. My guest today. Welcome back. All right, welcome back. This is the Something About You podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Eric Ries. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for doing this. You are, you're kind of like my Nelson Mandela. The Nelson Mandela effect? Do you know what that is?
No.
It's an effect where, like, everybody collectively people remember that he died in prison in the 1980s.
Oh, right. Even though not.
It never happened. He died fine in 2013.
Yeah, many years later. Yeah.
I told a bunch of people I'm having Eric on the podcast. This is great. They're like, "Oh, you've had him on before."
Oh, yeah.
They're positive I've had you on before. I'm like, "No, I've had a lot of great people.
Surely must have.
Not." So,
I'll take that as a compliment, I think.
they're like, "You've had had a lot of famous people, and he's a famous people, and of course he's been on." I think that's what it is.
I see.
Maybe it's good we've waited, though, because now we come into the world of AI, which is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, I'll set it up. Eric was an entrepreneur, like built a company. The company did what the company did. But somewhere along the line, he synthesized, put together a bunch of ideas in a book, and that book is famously The Lean Startup. Has since wrote The Startup Way, but the lean startup and other things too, long-term stock exchange, we'll talk about those, but that piece where you were an entrepreneur and then you became a thought leader, and the lean startup became like a movement. It
Mm-hmm.
just in a crazy way, there's a lot of ideas in venture capital and company building and those kinds of things. You got to the point where you were having, like, conferences where people were there to discuss your ideas. And I don't think that there's a founder in Silicon Valley to this day who can't, well, give you their interpretation of what the lean startup means. I don't know if they've all got it right, but they all have the book on their bookshelf.
Mm-hmm.
What was that? Like, what was that period for you where you went from, like, oh, I'm going to start writing, which is 99% of people don't do, to where it just became this thing? Like,
Yeah.
why?
It was an incredible phenomenon. And I was very reluctant to use the word movement to describe it. I always felt like people use that word, throw it around a lot
Yeah.
in writing and in business especially. But eventually I had to embrace it because it really was that. Like we had tapped into something very deep and very primal. And I think, frankly, a lot of it was that the old ideas about entrepreneurship just weren't very good, but it
Yeah.
was all we had. And so there was this moment, this story kind of originates around the financial crisis, 2008, 2009. So there was a kind of a general discrediting of what came before and a hunger for something new. So I guess, like a lot of overnight successes, if you I was just explaining this to a founder actually who was asking me about this history just today. And we were remarking on the fact that, basically every overnight success is like 10 years of grinding in the
Right.
making. People only see the overnight success. So to rewind the clock, when I had done my first couple startups, for whatever reason, the way that I thought intuitively that engineering should be done, that startups should be done, people thought was crazy. Just I don't know, I didn't think it was crazy, I thought it was very natural.
Right.
I was just maybe just I was thinking today, maybe I was just a failed scientist. So I really wish I could have done
Right.
science, but instead I wound up doing this. So I was like, "Look, well, of course we're gonna use a scientific method. Obviously, of course we're gonna get to the truth like that. Surely that's our and those things seem very obvious to me, and yet people thought they were quite strange, even crazy. And so one of the strange things was when I was just an employee of somebody else's startup or just within the cog in a larger machine, I could just push as hard as I wanted for the things that I wanted, trusting that the system would push back against me and we would compromise. So, remember when we used to release software so infrequently, you could put the year that the product came out in the name of
Right.
the product, like
Right.
Windows
Right.
95, obviously, that
You're
like
right.
that tells you how incredibly slow it was, like, by design. In fact, when they started releasing more often, it caused a huge naming problem apart for other problems. So I could just say, "Yeah, I wanna release faster," and, if people were releasing once a year, it doesn't really matter if I said we should release once a day, once a month, whatever, once a week. Maybe we compromise it once every 9 months or something, and I would count that as a victory. Well, as soon as I was in charge, like, when I starting my own companies and telling people we were gonna do things this different way, I'd say, "We have to release more frequently," and they'd be like, "Okay, boss, how often?" And I'd be like, "As frequently as possible." And they're like, "You mean every minute? Every day? Every month?" And I was like I didn't know. I was like, "Oh, I've actually never had to think about this." It was like you've been pushing against the wall for so long, the
Right.
wall is removed, you fall over. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out the answers to what I consider to be the most basic questions in entrepreneurship, like how often should you release? When should you release the first product? When do you listen to customers and when do you ignore them? Like to me, this is just like basic questions I want to know the answer to, and nobody could answer those questions for me. I would go
Right.
and ask all these fancy people, mentors, be like, "What should I do?" And they would always tell me, "Well, Steve Jobs did it that way once in 1989." And
Right.
I'd be like, "Well, but I'm not Steve Jobs, so is that relevant for me?" Mm. It's this.
Right.
People would tell me these kind of famous stories, but I was like, "But what's the theory? Help me understand." Anyway, the funniest thing happened to me was these ideas really worked. Like, I didn't even really understand how strong they were until we got a chance to really put them into practice, and I could see with my own eyes the incredible productivity they enabled. And yet the people doing it who worked for me could not understand why they worked. So it's like, if you've learned your whole life you need to do something,
Right.
and then I show you that you don't need to do it, you do it a different way, it's actually very disconcerting. And people actually had a really hard time believing that they're believing the evidence of their own eyes. Who are you gonna believe, me or your lying eyes? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
these ideas, these ideologies that are embedded in our thinking are so strong, it's hard to see the evidence even when it's right in front of you. So I spent just year after year grinding, trying to find a way to explain to people why does this work. And I read every business book you can imagine, every book on management, engineering. I studied Toyota Production System. That's why it's called why it's called lean startup this day because of lean manufacturing. Ask me about Tai Chi Ono. We could do the whole podcast about him.
Right.
And eventually I stumbled upon this set of concepts, which I started calling lean startup. And I didn't want anything more than just for the people who worked for me to be able to do what I was asking them to do and understand why. That was really as far as I had thought ahead.
Yeah.
And what I didn't understand at the time was that I was on a career track. So we don't even normally talk about entrepreneurship as a career. Maybe it's more common now, but certainly when I was coming up, that was no one ever used that language. So I didn't know what was gonna happen next, although it was very predictable. I left that company. I was thinking about what should I do next, and all these VCs started calling me.
Mm.
"Hey, could we get to know you? Hey, would you be an entrepreneur in residence? And more importantly, hey, would you meet with such and such portfolio company of mine and give them some advice?" Sure. And I had the weirdest thing kept happening to me. I would go to these meetings. I would sit down and they would say, "Okay, well, hot shot. What's your idea? And I would tell them these stories. Well, here's how we did things. We used to release software 50 times a day on average. Batch size was smaller. We would do all this stuff, or proto lean startup stuff. And people would absolutely lose it and start yelling at me. That's not true. That can't possibly work. You're lying. This insane. It's just like, and eventually I would have to be like, listen, sorry, you called me.
Right.
I'm doing you a favor. I don't work for you. You don't get to yell at me. Like, what's going on? I was actually ejected from conference rooms.
Wow.
People were so unhappy about this. And I had the brilliant idea that I should write some of these stories down. I was so embarrassed about it, by the way, that I did it anonymously. The blog was called Startup Lessons Learned. It didn't say by anybody. Passive voice. The lessons had been
Yeah.
learned.
Yeah.
And I just put them out there, not for anyone to read, but just so when somebody asked me for a meeting, I'd say, listen, why don't you read this first? If this strikes you as moronic, then we don't need to have the meeting. You can save me the embarrassment of
Boy,
getting
those
yelled
were
at.
the days. Today VC thinks of like, two ideas in 3 sentences. It's like, okay, branded,
That's right.
trademarked.
Yeah, just to give you a sense of how rare it was for startup people to be writing at that time. First of all, every VC I asked for career advice told me not to do this. It would be a career ender. Secondly, within a month of me writing these essays, three of the most prominent startup bloggers in the universe reached out to me directly to find out who I was because they had seen the traffic I was generating to them in their referrer logs
Wow.
of their weblog.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how low traffic it was that a new person shows up on the scene and sends you 5 clicks. People noticed and wanted to
Right.
know who is this new guy on the block. Like that's how different the information sphere was at the time. It was not like it is today. No TikTok, it was very different.
Right.
So yeah, then it just blew up. Like I said, the overnight success years in the making. I
Right.
remember at the old Web 2.0 Expo, if you remember that.
Yeah.
I got invited to do a talk. Sure. I'd never given a talk like that before, but I took it really seriously. I had a customer advisory board for my talk, and I really worked hard at the slide. I really worked at it hard. And I promoted it heavily on the blog, and I was really focused on making sure if I'm going to do a talk, I want it to be really good. I want people to be there. I didn't realize this, but at the time, I was like treating it like a startup.
Right.
That's the only hammer I had. So every nail, every problem looked like a nail.
Right.
And I showed up, and the room was totally packed, like to bursting. And I I didn't understand this at the time, but the way the expo worked in those days, they would have like it was tracked. So there'd be like 6 or 8 talks going on simultaneously in equally sized rooms. And everyone else, I found out later, everyone else who was in that time slot like hates my guts
Right.
because I didn't realize the whole conference is here for some reason.
Right.
That was normal. That was the first time I did a big talk like that. I didn't know it was unusual. I come and I give my talk, and lucky for me, talks weren't recorded in those days. So lucky for me, there was somebody in the room who had a first gen iPhone, voice memo on record.
Wow.
So there was a samizdat illicit recording bootleg of me giving that talk circulating around the valley for months afterwards. It led
You're
to all kinds of stuff. Anyway,
you're
it
like
was
the Grateful
really
Dead.
it was a crazy time. It was a totally crazy thing,
Yeah.
and just people were really, really excited about it. And yeah, we started to, we did conferences and we did all this stuff. I remember I was traveling around the world talking about it, and Charles Hudson, who's now at VC,
Yeah.
at Precursor, I remember he sat me down one day and he said, "Listen, instead of you traveling all over the world to give these talks, would it be more convenient if people came to you?" And I was like, "Yeah, but how does one go about that?" He's like, "I'll do it for you. No problem." It's just like I was like everything was like that. The right person would show up to help make the thing happen. People started to create lean startup meetup groups in cities all over the world.
Right.
It was just a very, very intense thing. And then here's the craziest part of the story to me. I was gearing up this whole time to meet our enemies on the field of battle. Like if you went to those early conferences, if you go check pictures of them and stuff like that, it's like a religious revival energy. People are very pumped, and we are rallying the troops for
Right.
battle. And like I'm like the enemies, the advocates of stage gate development, waterfall development are going to meet us out on the field of battle for which we will vanquish them, and we'll be ready for that.
Right.
And that doesn't happen. That's not real. Nobody ever came out onto the field. We just won by default.
Right.
These ideas went from radical, new, crazy things to the conventional wisdom,
Right.
kind of without going through any like there was no ceremony. It just kind of happened. And actually, a lot of people who were part of the very early adopter phase of the ideas were disappointed because it wasn't cool anymore. They're like the
Right.
edgy hipster in Brooklyn
Right.
who's like, that band is too popular. I can't listen to them anymore.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating experience. The psychology of it. just to be at the center of that maelstrom, it was a crazy and wonderful experience.
Well, and it goes much further than that too. You then like corporations take it up, right? As I
Oh,
understand it,
yeah,
you
uh-huh,
advise, you
absolutely.
hop on whatever plane, you go, and the top level executives are dragged into a conference room and taking notes, like of the biggest companies that people kind of can't imagine. I don't know if it's Boeing or whatever it is, but companies of that scale, what they could possibly be doing with you. But as I understand it, there becomes a pretty big demand for you to go talk to people like that.
Yeah, I reinvented myself for a time as a corporate consultant. I was a one-man band, I just did it on my own. I wasn't trying to build a consulting company, although now we have more infrastructure and there's a whole lean startup company, and for the people who want that, they can get that training.
Right.
But to me, I was just intellectually curious. Like, from the earliest days of giving these talks, people would come up to me after the talk, and I remember this really well. Like, it happened multiple times. I'm pretty slow on the uptake, so it took me a little while to realize what was going on. People come up to me and they say, "Hey, Eric, I'm a general manager of a division of big company X, and I heard your talk. And in your talk, you said that a startup is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And you said it has nothing to do with sector, industry, or size of company." Which I was like, that's true. That's just a matter of deductive logic from that definition to
Right.
that conclusion. They say, "Great, I accept your challenge."
Right.
And I'd be like, "What challenge? What are you talking about?" They'd be like, "Well, you said this can work for me, so
Right.
I wanna do it." And the first couple times it's happened to me, I just said, "Well, good luck to you." "Great, I'm so glad, good.
Right.
Please let me know how it goes." And they're like, "No, no, no, I'm trying to engage you to come help us do it." I was like, "Oh, you have the wrong department." I felt like it was like a department store, you've gotten off on the wrong floor. Um, this is sports equipment. You need men's suits.
Right.
I can't help you. I don't know anything about corporate politics. I don't know anything about corporate budgeting. I don't know. And they looked at me like with such pity in their face. I was like, "Did you not hear me? I told you I'm a general manager of a division of a large company. I eat corporate politics for breakfast.
Yeah.
That's not the problem." And I remember the first time I actually had to I was a little slow. I finally had the wherewithal to be like, "Oh, well, what is the problem?" I got curious. I was like, "Oh," and they gave me the whole story about, this happens in corporations all the time where they get the authority to do some innovation, but then it's like, "Okay, now I'm here with my team. What do we do every day? Like, what do we actually do mechanically to do an innovation? Like, how do you do it?" Anyway, I found that endlessly fascinating to go see entrepreneurship in different contexts, different domains out of Silicon Valley. I traveled the world. I got to see different startup ecosystems, but I also got to work on like deep sea oil drilling and cures for cancer and
Yeah.
military industrial complex and defense agencies and governments. And it was really fascinating because there is this brotherhood and sisterhood of entrepreneurs. No
Right.
matter what, no matter what industry, no matter what country,
Yeah.
we're a tribe, and when you meet somebody who's in the
Yeah.
tribe, like, you know it. It was actually really fun to be like, "Oh, I wasn't expecting to meet you here
And
in the
was there
bowels of the
right.
finance department of this massive company, but here you are. Okay,
Right.
let me help."
And was there a point where you realized like, "Oh, I'm not building another," I mean, maybe my own consulting startup, but I'm not building another little, you know, startup to do whatever. I'm a thing. Like I'm a, there's venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, there's entrepreneurs. A pure thought leader is a little more rare, very rare. Was there a point where you realized like, "Hey, that's what I'm gonna be, like that guy?"
I always thought the term thought leader was so stupid. It's like only only in business can we have the word thought leader.
Well,
It's
I
just
had
like,
guru
okay.
before that, and that wasn't
What
any good.
well, it's funny because I'm of the Peter Drucker school. Peter said that people, call him a guru because they can't spell charlatan.
That's good.
But yeah, but listen, I love ideas, so I didn't mind it. Like, to me, a startup, I always thought like a startup was like a beautiful way to embody an idea,
Yeah,
and so the fact that it also makes money to me was always a bit of a curiosity. Like, to
interesting,
me,
yeah.
it's not any more interesting to me that a startup makes money than that like a human body requires oxygen.
Yeah,
You definitely don't want to run out of oxygen, but
right.
you wouldn't say like having as much oxygen as possible is the best way to live. So that's how I always felt that way. So I didn't. I would advise. I've been built a lot of help people build all kinds of venture firms. I've been LPs in firms. Done a lot of stuff in the venture ecosystem, basically like all the kinds of things you can do.
Yeah,
But I think my weakness from a venture perspective is I don't care about getting a good deal. So
right.
someone comes to me and pitches me a startup. I like every startup I meet. People are always so surprised by this. I say yes to a lot of things because
Yeah,
I love startups. I love the fact that people are taking the swing, even if it seems like a terrible idea.
yeah,
Maybe I can help. And so yeah, it is. I do feel a little bit of an outsider, even though I live in Silicon Valley and I breathe the culture. I know all the people and I've been around it for a long time.
Yeah.
I do approach it in this different way, and I consider it an honor if people
Yeah.
find the ideas that I've promulgated independently useful,
Right.
then I consider that to be an honor. I like that. Whether I make any money from it or not is kind of a secondary question.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think if you once you realize how ridiculous it is to start a company and how hard it is, even when we see something that's you would say this is pretty silly. This person should, this is never going to work. You really got to kind of just step back and say, boy, God bless you for trying, because anything is, stepping away and trying to create something from nothing is just a soul crushing. Well, as I tell people, you shouldn't do it. Right. And the people come back and say, well, I'm going to do it anyway. You're like, okay, well, then you should do it. But
Right, 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 exactly, yeah.
if
Yeah,
you're asking me to tell
I
you to do it,
definitely
like,
feel like if I had really understood how hard it was gonna be, I probably wouldn't have gotten into it as a as a job in the first place.
yeah,
So I do think that ignorance is bliss to some degree, but again, I think now we're at a stage now we can start to cultivate entrepreneurship as a career discipline, and we can actually, like
yeah,
what people don't appreciate is that although it is hard, and it's one of these it's like you play a video game where, the boss of level 1 is just the Goomba in level 2,
yeah,
and it just gets exponentially harder every time. And that it is kind of like that. Like, your reward for surviving a phase is just to go to a new phase that's even harder.
yeah,
So but you can actually what my belief now is you can cultivate and train that muscle to learn to like it in the same way that elite athletes start to enjoy the burn
yeah,
of training. Um, you can kinda get to that level with entrepreneurship. So I do think that we could be doing things to make it more accessible to more people,
right,
if we help people kind of go in with eyes open and understand that the difficulty is intrinsic, but that doesn't mean you have to suffer.
yeah,
And the second thing is one of the things that has been a big surprise to me in my career, I didn't understand this in the early days, is that in a lot of ways, if you're willing to make the upfront investment to do things the hard way, you make other things easier. So I call the principle harder is easier. Like, if you have a really big, ambitious, like, earth-crushing mission to, like, do the impossible, do something that everyone knows can't be done, do something that, like, fully, thoroughly, and completely solve a problem that people are nibbling around the edges at, most people will tell you, like, "That's too hard. Just focus on your niche, narrow down, make it small, whatever." But if you really have the courage to do that, those companies don't have a whole bunch of problems that every other company that I meet with is constantly complaining about. Talent, finding how do you people are always like, "How do I find good talent?" It's like, well, if you have an exceptional mission like that, you don't have to worry about that.
right,
People will take a massive pay cut to work on something they truly believe in.
yeah,
If you treat people right, you build a reputation for integrity. Like, you don't have communication problems. You don't Raising money is a totally different experience for the companies that are thinking big versus the ones that are thinking small. So, I think that's also a really interesting kind of unexpected part of entrepreneurship is that if we teach people to embrace the difficulty, we can actually make the problem easier.
yeah. And so why isn't every company in the world now a rocket ship? Every entrepreneur endeavor should theoretically now be you put up 5 landing pages on the weekend. If it doesn't work, you don't do it, so that company never exists, and the company that does exist just iterates its way to infinitely quick growth. Like, what are people getting wrong? Because I did it in my last company, that I did. It was in the news space, and there was a bunch of people liked it, and we did all this stuff, and we iterated and all that, and we just did it for 2 years too long,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, yeah. That is
And
that
we
is a
know the
common problem.
trick. We read your book. Like, we knew the trick, we
Yeah.
knew it. Like, what
Yeah,
do
well, so let's
people
break that's a great I like that question a lot, and let's break it down. So first thing is, you remember when Chris Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker?
Yeah,
Familiar with that? Okay.
yeah, yeah,
So, I've now heard that the story is kind of in dispute now whether he really was a total amateur at the time he won it, but definitely the story goes, random person with the perfect name, Chris Moneymaker, wins this thing, gets tons and tons of people to go into poker. And all these professional players since that time who are exceptionally gifted poker players have not won the World Series of Poker. And you could look at that and say, but hold on, they've got all these. They have the analytics. We know about pot odds. We know about all this all this quantitative strategies and all this thing. And in fact, they can make tons and tons and tons of money playing poker. How come none of them have won the World Series of Poker? Because at the end of the day, poker's a probabilities game. So having a slight edge in the long run is super valuable. but it's no guarantee of any specific thing going your way. And I think that entrepreneurship is very much like that. As you get better at it, you shift the odds in your favor, but you don't shift them to 100%.
Yeah, right.
If we could
Right.
imagine, we could shift the odds from 10% to 20%, we've like profoundly changed the world in an unbelievable way, and still 80% of startups would fail.
Right.
So, I feel like, yeah, if there was a more reliable method, that would be
Yeah.
helpful. But honestly, the other thing is people are still not that good at it. It's
Right.
interesting, like a whole new generation of people reads the Lean Startup every year.
Yep.
So I meet people still to this day who just read the book for the first time.
Yep.
So to them, it's brand new because some people treat entrepreneurship like a career, but most people don't. For most people, it's a one-off thing that they try.
It's
And
a
so,
lottery ticket. Yeah.
yeah, we don't. I think part of the reason we get lottery outcomes is because people treat it like a lottery ticket, and so
Yeah.
therefore we don't get the learning.
Yeah.
This is like a skill you perfect over time, and the people that are good at it are really good at it, but a lot of people just dabble, don't get instantly rich, and then say, "Oh, the method doesn't work," as if I had promised them easy riches. Like,
Yeah.
I do try not to.
Right. I find it hard to convey to people that there's a thing, and so certainly there's a survivorship bias, where you think that like you start a company and you think your odds of succeeding are like 50-50. Like I'll probably fifty
Oh,
fifty. I'll
yeah,
be
yeah,
I'll
that's
be
like
be Mark
completely
Zuckerberg or
delusional,
something.
yeah.
And there's a thing in Silicon Valley, but Mark Zuckerberg is a great example of it, where stories you don't really know what happened, and the stories get retold. First of all, a lot more shady stuff maybe happens early on than you really knew,
That
and the line is described as being a lot straighter than it really was, right? Like, Mark Zuckerberg wasn't Mark Zuckerberg when he started. He became amazing, and the thing's amazing, but he was, if you interviewed him at the time, he wasn't, didn't have
Well,
he
there's
didn't
actually there is an interview of him. I gotta find the link to it. I don't remember where it is now, but there's an incredible one of like there's an incredible interview with Mark Zuckerberg on his couch at Stanford when
Yes,
they've
and
just come to Palo Alto for the first time.
drinking out of a red Solo cup.
Yeah, he's totally like,
Yeah, yeah.
and he's being asked to describe the vision of Facebook, and it's like it's so bad.
Yeah,
And it's actually I love stuff like that because it's really helpful to remember. And I remember reading in one of the Facebook history books, that summer they go to Palo Alto, and who's living in the house, the famous house in Palo Alto? It's Dustin Moskovitz, Mark Zuckerberg, Adam D'Angelo's there, and who else? And there's somebody else there. Anyway, and I don't think it's Joe. I think it's the other guy. Anyway, there's a couple of them live in the house,
right,
and they've invented Facebook already. Okay, like
right.
Facebook is already a hit at Harvard, and they're bringing it to Stanford. And who in the house is actually working on Facebook? Only Dustin Moskovitz.
Right.
The smarter, more, like, experienced programmers have already moved on to other ideas. My recollection is Adam D'Angelo was working on a webcam thing where he could,
Yeah,
program computer by doing hand gestures or something. Forget what
yeah,
Mark was working on. And Dustin Moskovitz, so the story goes, taught himself to program so that he could, keep up with the demand of people who were begging them to open Facebook on new college campuses.
right.
So, like, but what, and then they'll say, "What? You're saying he's not a visionary?" Well, he was.
Yeah,
But even he, and
yeah,
even with all that success, he didn't see it yet. And I think to a
yeah,
surprising degree, entrepreneurship is actually a process of self-discovery. A vision is not invented, it is discovered.
yeah,
And it requires a lot of inner work actually to like really figure out, what do I truly believe? What am I really committed to? What is this vision really?
right.
And to me, I think it's actually very beautiful that there's failure involved because in the fantasy plan of a startup, everything works out. There are no trade-offs to be made.
Right.
People love the product, the press loves it, and consumers love it, and enterprise loves it, and you can charge as much money as you want. You have really high margins, and the marketing is everything's great.
Yeah,
And then reality forces you to choose. That's what a pivot really is, right? It's like, which of these children are you willing to throw overboard
yeah,
for the success of the overall? And it's like it's painful and difficult. And what I have noticed is that the same team, same idea, same everything, but a different founder might make a different pivot call
yeah,
based on what they really feel inside. And when you've been through that purifying fire of having to do that, you know something about yourself and what you care about that you didn't know before if you pay
Yeah.
attention. I think that's actually really cool.
Well, what's kind of funny about that Mark Zuckerberg story, he was working it was like Wirehog or something. Was he working on like a
Yeah,
peer-to-peer
yeah, that's right. Peer to
something?
peer. You got it exactly right.
But he was like the fact when people are kinda like, "Is my company, do I have product market fit? Like, I have $1,000,000 in ARR," and
Mhm.
I'm like, "Yeah, you kinda crawled your way to it, and, it should" I use the term, "It should just be growing energetically." But I say you know it when you see it, but you think about it, there was Mark Zuckerberg with, like, product market fit pounding on the front door,
And
pounding on the
still
back
didn't appreciate
door,
it. Yeah.
and he was like, "I don't know. That's normal, right?" Like,
Well, that
that always
that's a big
happens.
part of the problem. Like if you study these pivot stories, the other thing people misunderstand about people always accuse me of loving failure and being like Mr. Failure. I'm like, no. If it was possible to succeed without failure, I'd be all for it. But of course, it's the success we crave. One of the reasons why failure is so incredibly important is to help people recognize success when it finally comes.
Yeah.
So, like,
Right.
in the I remember writing in the sort of about the Groupon story, this is before Groupon imploded. Like, that has a great founding story where they were trying to do, like, 2 or 3 versions of that idea that were just, like, hopelessly broken for, like, I think it was a year, 18 months. They were at it for quite a while, just getting absolutely nowhere, and
Yeah.
they hit on the idea to do the coupon thing. And I just remember them telling me the story of the first coupon they did, which was for like it was like a great MVP. They basically went to the pizza restaurant in the lobby of their building and just said, "Can we print up some coupons and give them out and get 2 free pizzas?" And like, you know, I can't remember the numbers now, but 28 people came and got a free pizza.
Right.
And most founders would be like, "Man, 28 people, that doesn't seem like a lot."
Yeah.
But when you've been getting 0 you've put up goose eggs for 18 months, you're like, "28 people, sign me up. How do I get
Right.
56 people?" You're like just you're there in a way, you're paying
Yeah.
attention in a way that's really difficult. And I think, yeah, taking it's, just oh,
Yeah.
sorry. 1 second.
Uh, that's the joke I always make. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you fine. Just
Oh,
got
yeah,
my
so
phone on.
the joke I always make where people have, like, stealth mode on their, LinkedIn, so nobody knows about their company. I'm like,
Yeah, it's like, "Don't worry. Don't
You
worry."
wished one person on this planet cared about your company, and if you emailed your business plan to Microsoft tomorrow, they're
Mhm.
not gonna steal your idea. So,
Yep, yep, that's
y
one of my old lines. I used to use that all the time.
you just
Yeah,
relax and on you go. What do people get wrong when they pivot seems to be the most misused word, in
yeah.
here.
So, yeah, sorry about that.
What
I did try.
what
Did try to make it clear.
or pivot in French, I guess. Like, what do people get wrong? Like, there's companies that pivot, but they're really not pivoting. They're just kind of like, kind of moving toward a local maximum, which I've definitely done. Or they're
Yeah.
just starting a different company. Like, they're just,
You
doing a
said it
different
exactly right. It's
thing.
like the Scylla and Charybdis of this is
Yeah, wow.
either you're just churning around, churning local maximum, or you're like we called it pivot by because I wanted to have the metaphor from basketball: 1 foot planted, 1 foot moving. If you move both feet at the same time, you've traveled.
Right.
So that's where it comes from. Now, what's interesting to me about it is so the definition of a pivot, just for your listeners, just in case anyone doesn't remember, is a change in strategy without a change in vision. So vision is in the people sometimes say like pivot means no vision. So you literally cannot pivot if you have no vision. It's not possible. And people get the same thing wrong about minimum viable product. It's like, oh, Eric just thinks it's just he's advocating for just doing small incremental things. But it's like, no, you don't. You have it backwards. If you just doing minimum product, just do minimum product. You don't need minimum viable product. You only need minimum viable product in the context of a big enough vision that it's hard to know if we're making progress or not. So what I think is really interesting is that I still encounter most startups, and I say, "Do you guys know about lean startup?" "Oh, yeah." I'm like, "Okay, tell me about a pivot." And they'll be like, "Herp derp, no idea
Yeah.
what a pivot is."
Right.
And I'm like, "Okay, how did you learn about lean startup? Like, did you really read the book?" And they'll be like, "I think I did." This is the problem with becoming conventional wisdom. There's a whole bunch of people that like to your point about the Mandela effect, they don't know if they read the book or not. It's just in the air. Everyone knows what a
Right.
pivot is. Everyone knows these concepts. Everyone knows minimum viable product. But it's like, well, did you actually read? And then of course the funny part is Lean Startup is the most famous for ideas that sit nicely on a bumper sticker.
Right.
So minimum viable product pivot that like people build, measure, learn, continuous deployment. People love that stuff. But if you read some of the later chapters, there's stuff in there that I never get fan mail about. No one ever calls me up to be like, let's talk innovation accounting. It's like that is like some obscure stuff. But from my point of view, that stuff's just as important.
Right.
It's an integrated system. I worked it out, like I said, grinding on it for many years by a matter of deductive logic and first principles thinking. I really tried to get it right. And I think people who kind of like to your point about why hasn't it been more effective, I think a lot of people just grab for one tool in the toolbox,
Right.
and it's like, I'm gonna build a house, and it's like, well, I got a saw, so I guess I can build a house now. It's like, well, you seem doubly confused to me. There's
Yeah.
other tools in the box, but also, do you know how to use these tools? What are you even
Yeah.
trying to accomplish? Do you have a blueprint? What are you doing?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been, I do my best. Like as an author, what's strange is you put an idea out into the world and then you don't control it or own it anymore.
Right.
It takes on a life of its own. And I constantly am thinking to myself, could I have done a better job? Could I have explained it better? Like, what was in my control and what wasn't at the end of the day?
Well,
At the end of the day, it's the reader gets to decide
yeah.
what the ideas mean to them.
Well, and you did go on to write The Startup Way, right? And you probably will write again, I assume. It seems to be
Yes,
something you,
indeed, indeed.
have some talent for.
I do have something cooking. That's true.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. So, what have you, now that you've got, you've ridden that wave up, you've observed Silicon Valley now since 2008 from that perch or whatever, to whenever the book
Hmm.
was a big hit. What have you observed? Like, how has it changed? Silicon Valley changed? I mean, the outcomes have become kind of bigger than they used to be. $1 trillion companies do exist in the world when they didn't, and
Yeah, everything's bigger. It's very predictable. Um, Silicon Valley is a cyclical business. There's a certain things that happen on the way up, and then there's certain things that happen on the way down. So for example, I wish I was more interested in investing because I feel like I could call the top
mhm,
of these things as soon as someone writes the article about how you don't need lean startup anymore, and such company that raised all this money is the proof.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
every couple of years, someone writes that article, and I was like, I should just short the whole thing. I start shorting stocks as soon as I see that article. I'm always called
Right,
for comment on that kind of stuff. So yeah, like we go through these cycles, and that's just because of the nature of entrepreneurship. There's a lot of turnover.
right.
So we mint new people, and the new people do not have the history. So to them, it's brand new. So it's like it's very interesting. I remember that feeling of being new and all these grizzled startup veterans being like, "Oh, kid, you don't understand. That's
Uh,
not an original thought, whatever." And now I'm like, "Oh, I understand why they did that." I found that so annoying, but like, "Oh, I see it now." Like there are these types, there are these recurring patterns.
yeah,
What I find frustrating about it, and again, this is maybe my perch as as the ideas person, is that as an industry, there's not as much self-reflection and, like, a desire to learn from our mistakes as I think there should be, and I think that is actually a business model error in the way that the industry is constructed. That basically, like, when we F up pretty bad, the most important people in the ecosystem make plenty of money,
right.
and so we've actually, like, we have in a certain way severed the connection between, like, the ability to make money and actually creating true profit-creating ventures.
Yeah,
And I think that's a little bit dangerous. So
yeah,
so certainly, one of the many things I try to figure out is like how could we reform? Like that's something that our society needs more
yeah,
even than just Silicon Valley needs. We need an economy where the elite people are like really yoked to the, I feel a sense of personal investment and incentive in the long-term prosperity of the nation
yeah,
and its body politic and its civic institutions.
yeah.
And when you break that connection, as we've done with a bunch of policy choices, and we could get into the history of it, I think it's quite dangerous, and you just look out the window,
Yeah.
you can see the consequences
Well,
playing out every day now.
and you've become more thoughtful over time about the founders themselves. It seems like that you've thought about who they are and sort of maybe mental health experiences that they're having that
Oh,
you,
certainly,
you
yeah.
that you might not have just being a highly paid person working at Google, for example.
That has
Um,
its own mental health challenges, yeah.
yeah, of course. Is it
Well,
that it's
yeah.
lonely or is it what's the
Well, so there's a lot. That's a really complicated question
yeah,
because there's a lot of psychology going on here. Starting with the fact that people, a lot of people get into entrepreneurship running away from some demon, some inner demon.
yeah,
But I do think we are doing founders a tremendous disservice in the way things are structured. Um, I don't mean to brag or anything, but I have personally helped people create billions of dollars in wealth for themselves.
right,
So I have many friends who are multi-billionaires, and many of those people I knew them before. I've watched them
yeah,
go from nothing to titan of industry, and
yeah,
I have no resentment about it. I don't begrudge them their success. I'm super happy for them. I don't think it's evil to want to try to make money or anything. Like none of that stuff. What pisses me off, what I begrudge them is how miserable so many of them are. I feel like we teach people a really crap version of business philosophy.
yeah,
That means that strength is exploitation that you have to compromise your vision and values eventually, and the best you can do is to give ground grudgingly. We have a system where anyone can have their company stolen away from them at any time. Investors have the prime position. We literally have a theory called shareholder primacy, that they are the primary constituent that makes the company go. Anyway, it's a set of things that has left people really unhappy.
Right.
I know many founders who like sold their company and they made all this money and they're like, no one, they can't get any sympathy from anybody. You have
Right.
$100 million,
Right.
people don't have a lot of sympathy for you. But it's like they sacrificed their baby. They sold it to Google and Google shut it down.
Right.
So they're rich, but to what end? Anyway, so I could tell you lots and lots of stories. People
Yeah.
take their company public and it turns into this malign thing. And then you have these people who are like running away from their own legacy, trying as hard as they can to figure out some way to rebrand themselves as virtuous and good when
Right.
their actual behavior, their actual legacy
Yeah.
is negative. And I think that is causing actual mental health problems. Like I think we have people in our industry who are melting down in public.
Yeah.
And I think that's why. I think it's actually very clear to me
Yeah.
why that's happening. And I don't think it has to be that way. I think this is like a colossal error. And we are
Right.
teaching people the wrong philosophy of business, and a better philosophy would produce better, happier outcomes for everybody.
And at what stage can you put in place a structure or a philosophy to fix, because when you're starting a startup and you said, hey, we need to really make sure we have this structure so we don't do evil, everyone's going to be like, let's make sure somebody cares about anything that we do before we
Oh
worry
yeah,
about
yeah. It's
that.
too early to worry about that kind of thing.
you
Yeah.
know and
Yeah.
then once you're public and you've got a board of directors,
And
they're
now
like,
it's too
well,
late.
the shareholders aren't going to want it. Like, when
It's
should a thoughtful person do it?
I think the advice people get about this is so catastrophically wrong as to be like borderline criminal. So first of all, it is always too early until it's too late.
Yeah.
That's the simple principle. So like I've literally I'll tell you a story. I was sitting, never forget this. I was sitting with a pre-IPO founder, you know, prepping for an actual monster success IPO. Okay, this company is great company. And there was all this stuff they wanted to do, structural things they had wanted to do all along to make sure the company like stood for something. It's not about virtue signaling. It's not about being woke or whatever the nonsense people talk about now. Like this is about a company that can be true to its own mission. That's all we're talking about. And just, do you believe? I always ask people a simple question. You tell me who the most evil company in the world is in your mind. To me, it's Philip Morris.
Yeah.
My father's a pulmonologist, so like tobacco is like the most evil product ever.
Right.
Okay. If Philip Morris comes to you and says, "Hi, I would like to buy your company for $1 more per share than it's worth," yes or no? Every founder I've ever met in my life, I've ever given this hypothetical to, is like, obviously no.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll be like, well, what are they going to use it for? Oh yeah, to sell
Right.
cigarettes to children.
Right.
Okay, no, definitely not over my dead body. It's like, oh, funny you should mention that. Let's
That,
go pull your charter from the state of Delaware. Oh, I have it right here. Look what it says. Many governance experts would say, because you sign your signature's right here,
yeah.
you have a fiduciary duty to say yes. So it's like, okay, if someone has enough money, and remember, it's often not even their own money. Someone can borrow enough money from a bank, they can force your company to die at
Right.
any time. You have no say in it. Do you think that's a good idea? Anyone says yes to that?
Right.
Well, I can't. Like, okay, great. You're no founder. Not a
Right.
single founder ever has ever said yes to that. But there's other people who think that's a great idea. That's considered the apotheosis of good governance, if you can believe it, today. Ridiculous. So, okay, you say, all right. So that's the situation. You don't want that to happen to you? No, I definitely don't. So I remember sitting with this founder, and he's like, "We've been prepping for this IPO, we're working on it." And I remember he turns to his CFO. He's like, "Hey, remember that stuff we talked about doing to make sure?" And I won't give it away what it was, but like, and you told me it was too early. The guy's like, "Mm-hmm. Did we ever get around to doing that stuff?" And the guy's like, "Oh, you were serious about that?"
Right.
"Oh no, of course we didn't." He's like, "But it was too early then. Can we do it now?" "No, dude, it's way too late now." And CEO just blew up. He's like, "Wait a minute. When was it the right time? You're telling me
Right.
that last year from July 4th to July 8th, there was a brief window of time when it was the right time and I could have done this stuff and I didn't.
Right.
Why didn't you tell me?" And he was just so angry.
Yeah.
And the CFO, at the time, I was really outraged with him. I was there to help. I'm on his side, so we're all mad and da, 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 da. The CFO was not the slightest bit perturbed.
Right.
He was like, "Okay, I hear you." He's like, "I want you." And he was like, "That's my new number one priority. I want this part of my IPO." And he leaves the room. He storms out of the room. And I'm just sitting there. I'm in the room still. He's left.
Right.
And everyone in the room starts laughing.
Uh-huh.
They were laughing at him. That's funny. And one of the guys like, "Well, great. I'll add that to my list of number one priorities." And I was like, "Guys, you can't." I was like, "You're gonna get in so much trouble." I'm like the kid who's like, "I'm gonna tell on you," because I
Right.
like, I'm sitting right here,
Right.
and I'm gonna tell him what you said. And I realized at the time that I thought I was being so smart, but actually they were the ones who were smart. They understood correctly that it didn't matter what I said or did. They could just wait him out.
Right.
They don't give a crap about that stuff. Most of those people don't even work at that company anymore. Their job, they called it landing the plane.
Yep.
Their job was to complete this IPO transaction and then move on to some other job. And so all this blah, blah, blah about mission and whatever is not their problem. That's the CEO's thing. So like that was really an eye-opening experience to me. So the answer to your question, when to do it, as soon as possible.
Right.
I think anyone who lets themselves be talked out of this at the early stages is just missing a golden opportunity to get it right. And
Yeah.
what's funny is I've gotten good at this now. So like I've advised lots and lots and lots of founders. I'll give you an easy one. The thing I talked about selling your company to Philip Morris,
Hmm.
you could make a 2-page filing in the state of Delaware to make that impossible.
Wow.
It's like maybe the easiest single thing I can recommend people do. It's called becoming a public benefit corporation or PBC. I mean, even Elon Musk, even XAI is public benefit corp. Like obviously, it's like an obvious. If you know what you're talking about, this is an obvious thing to do.
Right.
Of course, you should do it. So I tell founders, and I have a whole bunch of things like this that I tell people to do. They go to their lawyers, they go to their VC, whoever, and they're like, "Can I do this stuff?" And they're always like, "Well, if you want to, I guess."
Right.
Like, "Well, I do want to." I don't know, man. Are you sure? People might not like it. And I always try to train founders to be like, "Well, ask them if they like it."
Right.
And they're always be like, "Oh, no, no, I think it's fine. Whatever you wanna do. I'm founder friendly."
Right.
But, other investors might not like it.
Yeah.
I'm always like, "Who are these other investors? Could I meet them? Could we have a meeting with the other like, who are these mysterious other people?" I think it's a again, it goes back to an ideological commitment that I don't know if it's even consciously understood by the people who propagate it. That's why financial systems are so powerful, is they have gravitational influence that
Yeah.
is felt unconsciously. So, yeah, I think if there's a founder right now who's starting a company who's thinking about this, like, do not compromise
Yeah.
on these provisions. Like, otherwise, you're just allowing people to run over you sometime in the future. And the other thing that's so funny about it is if you just think for a second, if you do these things, if you add these provisions, let's say it's true that some investor in the future doesn't like it, and you really want to work with them, you can always capitulate.
Yeah. Right.
So let them make it take it out. Okay, so you take it out. Like, what
Right.
does it really cost you to get it right from the beginning? It's extremely low cost. And hey, maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe you'll have a choice to work with people who actually believe in you and your vision, and then
Right.
you won't have to take it out. And in
Yeah.
fact, if you think about this for even 5 seconds, you'll be like, wait a second, would it be nice to know of the many VCs that I talk to, which of them are on my side and which ones are just waiting for the chance to kick me out to make a buck?
Yeah.
I think that's actually extremely useful when it comes to allocation time to decide who should get the allocation. I can't tell you how many founders I know who
Yeah.
give the allocation to the people with the knives out. It's such a mistake.
Right. What an incredible journey from like where you started to thinking about and changing the world in the way that you
Mm.
are if you're convincing people to do these things. So what happens now? Like what are you thinking about now? We've got AI in the water. That could be a thing. Turns out. Like
Turns out.
what's
Oh yeah.
next?
No,
What are
I
your
mean,
mind?
listen, I'm very busy. So, how much time do you have to answer this question? Yeah, I started something called the Long-Term Stock Exchange, which is
Right.
still going strong. Actually made some money for the first time last year. Very exciting. For working on it
Hey,
for so many years. Yeah, thank
that's
you.
cool. Well, it's
It's
long term, so
it's long term. Well, we told I every investor before we got them involved, I was like, hey, remember, we put long term on the name of the company. It's right there on the door. Like, do
Yep.
not expect this to be an easy one. That has been quite a slog, but it's going strong, and I'm very proud of what the company's accomplished there. Speaking of doing the impossible. And yeah, like I have a AI research lab called Answer AI, which I started with Jeremy Howard,
Right.
looking at just really trying to do the fundamental research about what is AI actually practically useful for, which
Yeah.
to me is the most interesting question in AI, actually, more than questions of AGI. And it's kind of modeled on Edison's invention factory from the dawn of electricity.
Yeah.
Super exciting, super cool company. And because of my work on the Anthropic Long-Term Benefit Trust, I think a lot of AI companies have come to seek out my advice about governance and
Right.
structuring and stuff. So I've just gotten to be involved in a lot of cool stuff in AI. It's been super interesting. And look, I get why people who are out of the industry are skeptical because, buzzwords and hype is like Silicon Valley is like second and third leading exports, right? So we get excited about Bitcoin or drones or whatever, and there's never any accountability. We never come back
Yeah.
and say, well, actually, sorry guys, it wasn't. what we thought it was. So I get why people are concerned about AI, but I do think this time there's something different about it, which is not to say that all the hype is justified, and I think a lot of people are doing a lot of unethical stuff.
Yeah.
So, I'm not here to be a defender of it, but I think
Yeah.
the underlying, if you really understand the technology of what has been accomplished here, what
Yeah.
the underlying technology is capable of, and you learn how to use it in a responsible way,
Yeah.
it's awfully exciting.
I've had a bunch of different AI folks on this podcast, and I ask them. Well, I started asking them kind of facetiously, but I'm now concerned that I get the answer half the time. I'm like, "Are we gonna have to blow up the data centers?"
Hmm.
When the AI decides, like, "We're not really that useful." And a few of them are like, "Probably not." I'm like, "Wait,
Isn't that crazy? I know. It's like, shouldn't you
probably
know the
not?"
answer to that question?
What what is your sense on how risky this all really
Well,
is?
so I'll tell you what I think is really fascinating. I have my own personal views about AI safety, and I've done a lot of work in that area, but it doesn't so much matter. I think people get really fixated on predicting the future. So they say, okay, here's a scenario I'm worried about. Blah, 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 blah. Therefore, we have to blow up the data centers. Therefore, we need a global treaty for thermonuclear war to do the data. They work backwards from this one scenario, all the things you have to do. And the problem with that line of thinking is that for every single one of those scenarios, I can construct an alternate scenario where the very thing you did to prevent your scenario is the thing that caused the dystopia in my scenario. So by creating a global one world government to do the thing, you created a centralized control of all AI, and those people became despotic and
Yeah,
took over the world, right? So people, I think, are very paralyzed. If we can't even agree on like the basic stuff, what can we do? And a lot of people have tried very hard to polarize this issue and make it as political as possible to prevent collective action, which
right.
I think was a despicable thing to do, no matter whether they're right or wrong on the merits. Like that's, I think, almost always a negative EV strategy for society. So here's the framework that I've used to help a lot of people get out of paralysis. It's a very simple framework, which is rather than focus on one future scenario. AI is one of these like foundational technologies like electricity with very, 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 very wide variance of future outcomes. So we want to consider the full spectrum of all the things that might happen with AI.
Right.
Everything from nothing, it's a fraud, to, sentient robots or whatever, and everything in between.
Yeah.
And ask yourself, what are the actions that you want to take today that would be useful in a wide variety of those future scenarios? And take those actions. Because, like we talked about with Lean Startup, these things evolve over time. People are so focused on like, we have to, remember they were like, we have to do the pause, we have to do this, we have to do that, we have to do it right now. If we don't do it right now, we fail. And so people build these coalitions to try to accomplish a thing. And when that one thing doesn't happen, the coalition dissolves in failure. That creates an attack vector for their enemies to be like, we'll just keep Lucy in the football you until you never get anything done. But like all the issues we had a year ago, we still have. And we're gonna have next year too. And we're gonna have to, but as time goes on, we'll also learn a lot more. Like we know so much more about how LLMs work now than we did a year ago.
Right.
And many of the best practices and laws of scaling and whatever that we knew last year have turned out to be not so.
Yeah.
So when you use this framework to say what would be useful today in a wide variety of future scenarios, it just to me it creates really obvious logical things we ought to be able to build coalitions around. Right? Like let's do mandatory disclosure. Forget we can get to blowing up the data centers, but first of all, my question is how would you know it's time to blow up the data centers? Like in a lot of these scenarios, by the time you know it's time, the AI already has control of your firing codes.
Right.
How are you going to launch the weapon? It's just like what, like if you actually work backwards to like how do you know it's time? So what do we
Right.
need to know? So yes, you could think about things like mandatory disclosure. We need to harden access points to key and sensitive infrastructure. We have to do that anyway. If you think about it hard enough, you're like, wait, we need to do that anyway. Whether AGI comes or not, that's useful to do. We have to invest in state capacity. Like unfortunately we're stripping state capacity down to the studs right now. It's the exact
Right.
opposite of what we ought to be doing for safety. And we should be building international alliances, not shredding them. So like, we're not only are we not doing the things I think are the most obvious things that would be applicable in a wide variety of circumstance, by failing to apply this test of logic to what we do, we're actually have talked ourselves into doing a lot of really harmful things, which is too bad.
Yeah. Well, as I said with Cyan Bannister, the future is still cool.
It
Uh,
always
uh,
will be. It always
Unknown,
will
but
be.
pretty cool. Well, thanks for doing this. How do people? I mean, obviously they can follow you by buying either of your books, Lean Startup or The
Of
Startup Way. But
course,
how
of
else should
course.
people keep up with what you're
Yeah,
doing?
I'm just Eric Ries on Blue Sky, ERICRIES. theleanstartup.com. Leanstartup.co is the company that does, as I said, consulting and training and stuff for people who want that. And ltse.com and answer.ai both have, active blogs. You can follow us along for the latest developments. And I said I'm working on a new book, but I'm not ready to make any announcements yet. So
All
follow me on
right.
social media. When the time has come, I will speak. I will
Well,
speak on that topic. Yeah.
we can't wait. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. This has been the Something Measure podcast. Eric Ries, my guest. Talk to you next time.